Hey everyone, welcome back to the Daily Past. Today we've got a really important topic to dig into. The Biden administration has finally spoken out about the horrific violence against religious minorities in Bangladesh. For months they stayed quiet, but now suddenly they're condemning the situation. Why the change of heart? Well, it turns out this didn't just happen out of the blue. Behind the scenes, there's been some serious backdoor diplomacy happening. And if we're being honest, the driving force behind this shift is India. Just a few weeks ago, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi raised this very issue with President Biden during a phone call. At the time, the US didn't say much. They were hesitant, to say the least. But now, with the pressure building, the Biden administration has finally decided to speak up. Why the delay? Why now? And what role did India play in all of this? Well, we're about to dive deep and break it down for you. Stick around. Alright, let's set the stage. Bangladesh has been a mess since Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina stepped down in August 2024. The interim government, led by Muhammad Yunus, has been struggling to maintain any kind of order. Protests are rampant, violence is on the rise, and religious minorities, particularly Hindus, have been caught in the crossfire. We're talking about homes burned to the ground, businesses looted, temples destroyed. This isn't just some isolated incident, it's a full-blown assault on religious communities. But here's the kicker. For months, the US stayed silent. They knew what was happening, but they didn't act. The violence escalated, but Washington kept its mouth shut. And you have to ask yourself why. Why didn't the Biden administration step in earlier? Why didn't they call out the violence against religious minorities from the start? Now this is where things get interesting and a little more complicated. Back in October 2024, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi raised his concerns directly with President Biden. Modi didn't sugarcoat anything. He told Biden that the situation in Bangladesh was dire and that the violence against Hindus and other minorities had to stop. He wasn't asking for a small statement. He was demanding action. But guess what? The US didn't take any significant steps, no strong condemnation, no clear message to Bangladesh. At the time, Biden's administration was hesitant to get involved. Why? Well, that's where things get messy. The US had its own reasons for not jumping into the fray. They were still trying to maintain a relationship with Sheikh Hasina's government, which had been a strong ally in the region. And with Hasina out, the interim government was struggling to hold things together, but the US didn't want to upset the fragile balance in Bangladesh, especially since they were still holding out hope that the country would cooperate on military and strategic matters. Let's talk about why the US hesitated for so long. The truth is, the Biden administration was trying to keep its options open. Under Hasina, Bangladesh had been seen as a strategic partner for Washington in South Asia. And there was the issue of a military base. Hasina had flat out denied the US the right to establish a base in Bangladesh, something the US had been angling for, to expand its presence in the region. So the US wasn't exactly in the best position to throw its full support behind a shaky interim government in Dhaka that had just ousted its main ally. They thought holding back would maintain some influence. But as the violence against Hindus worsened, the US found itself in a tough spot. They couldn't stay silent forever, especially when their own ally, India, was demanding stronger action. India knows that a destabilized Bangladesh is a direct threat to its own national security, and they weren't going to let the US ignore what was happening. The US was stuck between maintaining relations with a failing government in Bangladesh and keeping its strong alliance with India intact. And guess what? India wasn't about to let the US off the hook. And here's where it all changes. After weeks of staying quiet, the US has finally condemned the violence. White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby recently stated that the US is working closely with Bangladesh's interim government to enhance their security forces and ensure the protection of minorities. But hold up, let's think about this for a second. Why the sudden shift? Why did the Biden administration change its stance so quickly? Well, there's no denying it. India played a huge part in this. They pushed hard. And they used their influence as a regional power to pressure the US into action. The Biden administration can deny it all they want. But there's no doubt that India's concerns pushed them to finally speak up. India wasn't just expressing concern for the violence in Bangladesh. They were calling out the US for failing to take action. But here's the thing. The violence in Bangladesh is not just about one country or one religious community. It's a regional issue. If Bangladesh spirals into more chaos, it's not just Bangladesh that suffers. The entire South Asian region feels the heat. India, which has already been dealing with its own issues with neighboring countries, cannot afford to have Bangladesh implode. And that's why India was so vocal. If the US wasn't going to act, India was ready to push them into action. The regional balance of power depends on stability in Bangladesh, and India wasn't going to let the US sit on the sidelines any longer. But here's where the real problem lies. The Biden administration has finally spoken out, yes. But is it enough? the US waited way too long to make a stand. The violence against Hindus in Bangladesh has been going on for months, and only now after India pushed them, they finally condemned it. And that delay? It's not just a failure of diplomacy, it's a failure of human rights leadership. So what does this all mean? The Biden administration has finally condemned the violence in Bangladesh, but it's clear this wasn't a decision they made on their own. India forced their hand. They couldn't ignore it any longer. The US was hesitant for too long, driven by strategic interests and their desire to keep diplomatic relations with Bangladesh intact. But India, the regional power, stepped up and pushed for stronger action. And in the end, that's what got the US to speak out. The real question is, will this lead to any real change on the ground in Bangladesh? The US and India can say all they want, but if Bangladesh's government doesn't take action to stop the violence, none of this matters. The situation in Bangladesh is dire, and it's about time the government there stepped up to protect its minorities. The international community, including the US and India, can't do it for them. Now, we want to hear from you. Do you think the US took too long to condemn the violence in Bangladesh? Was India's pressure the real reason behind the Biden administration's change of stance? And how do you think this situation will affect future US-Bangladesh relations? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear what you think about this whole diplomatic mess. Thanks for tuning in to the Daily Past. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep watching the Daily Past.